Between 1942 and 1945, American and Japanese forces engaged in close-quarters combat across the Pacific Theater under conditions that tested every aspect of military equipment. Among the most critical tools were sidearms, weapons that often determined survival when fighting devolved into confined spaces of bunkers, jungle trails, and ship compartments. Two pistols dominated this theater: the American Colt M1911A1 and the Japanese Type 14 Nambu. These weapons represented fundamentally different approaches to firearms development, industrial capacity, and military doctrine. The M1911A1, adopted in 1911 and refined through decades of use, fired the .45 ACP cartridge, a round specifically engineered for stopping power. The Type 14 Nambu, introduced in 1926, chambered the unique 8x22mm Nambu cartridge, reflecting Japan's attempt to modernize its officer corps with an affordable, domestically produced sidearm. This analysis examines why these two nations developed such different weapons, how industrial capacity shaped their deployment, and what the technical specifications meant in actual combat conditions. The comparison reveals not merely differences in firearm design, but fundamental contrasts in how industrial powers approached modern warfare. The M1911A1's development reflected systematic American military procurement. In 1906, the U.S. Army Ordnance Department initiated testing to replace the inadequate .38 caliber revolvers then in service. The Philippine-American War had demonstrated that existing sidearms lacked sufficient stopping power against determined opponents. The Army established specific requirements: a semi-automatic pistol firing a cartridge capable of immediate threat neutralization. John Moses Browning submitted his design in 1911. The weapon featured a single-action, recoil-operated mechanism with a tilting barrel lock. The .45 ACP cartridge was developed concurrently, designed to launch a 230-grain bullet at approximately 830 feet per second. This combination produced 352 foot-pounds of muzzle energy with chamber pressure of 21,000 psi, relatively low by modern standards, but sufficient for reliable function with heavy projectiles. The M1911 saw extensive use in World War I, where trench warfare validated its close-quarters effectiveness. By 1926, the Army implemented minor modifications: a shorter trigger, improved grip safety, and extended grip tang. This updated version, designated M1911A1, became the standard production model through World War II. American firearms manufacturing had evolved into a sophisticated industrial system. By 1941, the United States possessed machine tool capacity, precision manufacturing expertise, and quality control systems that enabled rapid production scaling. When war demand increased, the Ordnance Department distributed M1911A1 contracts across multiple manufacturers: Colt, Remington Rand, Ithaca Gun Company, Union Switch and Signal, and Singer Sewing Machine Company. This distributed production approach demonstrated American industrial philosophy. Rather than concentrating manufacture in government arsenals, the system leveraged private sector capacity. Remington Rand alone produced over 900,000 units between 1942 and 1945. Total wartime production reached 1,878,742 pistols, a figure that exceeded the entire Japanese Type 14 production across nearly 2 decades. Japan's approach reflected different constraints and priorities. The nation had industrialized rapidly after the Meiji Restoration, but by 1920 standards, Japanese manufacturing capacity remained limited compared to Western powers. Military doctrine emphasized rifles and machine guns as primary infantry weapons, with sidearms considered secondary equipment issued primarily to officers. Colonel Kajiro Nambu designed the Type 14 to address specific Japanese requirements. It needed to be more affordable than previous models while maintaining reasonable functionality. The pistol's striker-fired mechanism was simpler than the M1911A1's hammer system, reducing manufacturing complexity. The 8x22mm Nambu cartridge used a bottlenecked case design that was unique globally. No other military adopted compatible ammunition. This isolation was not accidental. Japanese military planners operated under the assumption that captured enemy ammunition would be unavailable or incompatible, so creating unique calibers posed no logistical disadvantage. The 8x22mm launched a 102-grain bullet at approximately 1,000 feet per second, producing 227 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, about 65% of the M1911A1's power. The Type 14's affordability came at 78 yen per unit, compared to 180 yen for earlier Nambu variants. However, this still represented a substantial expense. In 1940, a Japanese Army second lieutenant earned approximately 70 yen monthly. Purchasing a sidearm consumed more than 1 month's salary, creating financial pressure on junior officers. Japanese military culture required officers to provide their own sidearms, a tradition inherited from samurai sword ownership customs. This practice distributed procurement costs but also meant that personal financial constraints affected equipment quality. Some officers purchased used pistols or cheaper alternatives, while others delayed purchases until promotions provided additional income. By 1944, Japan had manufactured approximately 400,000 Type 14 pistols since 1926, an average of 22,200 units annually. American M1911A1 production in 1943 alone exceeded 500,000 units. This production disparity reflected broader industrial capacity differences that would prove decisive across all equipment categories. The contrast extended beyond mere numbers. American manufacturers maintained consistent quality control throughout the war, with interchangeable parts across all contractors. Japanese production quality declined significantly after 1942 as material shortages intensified. Late-war Type 14 pistols often exhibited rough machining, poor fitting, and reliability problems that stemmed from substitute materials and rushed manufacturing. The M1911A1's mechanical design incorporated several features that enhanced combat reliability. The tilting barrel lock system used 2 locking lugs on the barrel that engaged corresponding recesses in the slide. Upon firing, barrel and slide recoiled together locked for approximately 0.25 inches before the barrel tilted downward, unlocking and allowing the slide to continue rearward. This system proved exceptionally reliable under adverse conditions. The relatively low chamber pressure of the .45 ACP meant that fouling, dust, or minor obstructions rarely prevented function. The pistol could fire reliably even when exposed to mud, sand, or salt water, critical advantages in Pacific theater operations. The M1911A1's magazine held 7 rounds, with 1 additional round in the chamber providing 8 total. The magazine release, positioned on the left side of the frame behind the trigger guard, allowed rapid magazine changes with the shooting hand. The thumb safety, also on the left side, could be disengaged during the draw stroke without changing grip. Critical to combat effectiveness was the grip safety, a lever on the rear of the grip that prevented firing unless properly held. This design prevented accidental discharges while still allowing single-handed operation if necessary. The pistol could be fired with the magazine removed, an important feature if the magazine was damaged or lost during combat. The .45 ACP cartridge's effectiveness derived from basic physics. Momentum equals mass times velocity. The 230-grain bullet at 830 feet per second carried substantially more momentum than lighter, faster projectiles. Upon impact, this heavy, slow-moving bullet transferred energy efficiently while minimizing overpenetration. Terminal ballistics testing demonstrated that .45 ACP rounds typically penetrated 8 to 12 inches in tissue, creating temporary wound cavities approximately 4 to 6 inches in diameter. The bullet's tendency to deform upon impact increased this tissue disruption. The practical result: a center mass hit usually incapacitated the target immediately regardless of precise shot placement. The Type 14 Nambu employed a different mechanical approach. Its striker-fired system eliminated the hammer, instead using a spring-loaded firing pin released by the trigger mechanism. This simplified production but created functional complications. The safety mechanism required 2-handed operation, 1 hand to grip the pistol, another to manipulate the safety lever above the trigger guard. In combat, this design proved seriously disadvantageous when rapid response was necessary. The Type 14's magazine held 8 rounds, 1 more than the M1911A1. However, this apparent advantage was negated by several design flaws. The magazine incorporated a disconnect feature that prevented firing if the magazine was not fully seated. While intended as a safety mechanism, this meant a Type 14 with a damaged magazine became completely inoperative, unlike the M1911A1, which could still fire a chambered round. The magazine release system proved problematic under field conditions. Located at the magazine base, it required pressure from both sides to release. Mud, corrosion, or minor damage often caused the mechanism to jam. Multiple combat reports noted Japanese officers struggling to reload their pistols under fire. The Type 14 lacked a slide hold open feature. When the last round was fired, the slide cycled forward, leaving no visual indication that the weapon was empty. Operators had to manually verify chamber status, an additional step that consumed precious time in combat situations. The 8x22mm Nambu cartridge's ballistic properties reflected its design compromises. The 102-grain bullet at 1,000 feet per second carried less momentum than the .45 ACP despite higher velocity. Kinetic energy calculations showed 227 foot-pounds versus 352 foot-pounds, a 35% difference. More critically, the lighter bullet's wound characteristics differed substantially. The 8x22mm typically penetrated 10 to 14 inches with minimal expansion, creating a narrower wound channel. The higher velocity caused more overpenetration, meaning energy was wasted exiting the target rather than transferring into tissue. Combat reports consistently noted that targets hit with Nambu rounds often remained combat effective for several seconds, sometimes long enough to return fire. The bottlenecked case design of the 8x22mm Nambu created feeding reliability issues. The sharp shoulder where the case narrowed required precise magazine geometry to feed reliably. Manufacturing variations in late-war production often resulted in feeding malfunctions, particularly with worn magazines. Comparative analysis of the two cartridges reveals fundamental differences in design philosophy. American ordnance engineers prioritized immediate incapacitation, accepting the trade-off of lower velocity. Japanese designers sought a flatter trajectory and higher velocity, accepting reduced stopping power. In close-quarters combat situations that characterized much Pacific fighting, the American approach proved more effective. American sidearm distribution reflected systematic logistics planning. The Table of Organization and Equipment for a U.S. Marine Corps division in 1942 authorized 798 pistols. By 1945, this allocation had increased to 1,771 per division, a 122% increase that reflected lessons learned about Pacific combat requirements. Pistol distribution prioritized specific roles. All commissioned officers, staff NCOs, tank crews, artillery personnel, communication specialists, and medical personnel received M1911A1 pistols. This distribution recognized that these personnel either operated in confined spaces where rifles proved unwieldy or required backup weapons while performing specialized duties. The U.S. military's ammunition production capacity ensured adequate supply throughout the Pacific Campaign. Lake City Army Ammunition Plant alone produced over 3 billion rounds of small arms ammunition during the war years, including hundreds of millions of .45 ACP rounds. Standard issue for M1911A1 equipped personnel included 3 7-round magazines plus a basic load of 50 to 100 additional rounds during operations. Training programs ensured competence with the weapon. Marine Corps qualification courses required marksmen to engage targets at 15 and 25 yards, firing both slow-fire and timed sequences. Army qualification standards were similar, emphasizing accuracy under controlled conditions rather than rapid engagement. However, combat experience revealed that formal training inadequately prepared personnel for actual fighting conditions. Veterans consistently reported that combat pistol engagements occurred at ranges under 10 yards, often under 5 yards, with targets frequently moving. This led to modified training emphasizing point shooting and multiple round engagement rather than precision aiming. Maintenance requirements for the M1911A1 proved minimal under field conditions. The pistol's robust design tolerated neglect better than more complex weapons. Standard maintenance involved periodic cleaning and lubrication, tasks that required no specialized tools. The weapon's reputation for reliability was well earned. operational reports consistently noted that properly maintained M1911A1 pistols rarely malfunctioned. Japanese sidearm logistics operated under severe constraints. As an officer-purchased item, the Type 14 was not part of standard military supply chains. Ammunition distribution for pistols received lower priority than rifle and machine gun ammunition. As the war progressed and Japanese logistics deteriorated, pistol ammunition became increasingly scarce. Combat reports from Guadalcanal, Saipan, and Okinawa noted Japanese officers carrying pistols with only partial magazine loads or no spare ammunition. This scarcity meant the Type 14 was often fired only in desperate situations, reducing opportunities for crews to develop proficiency through practice. The unique 8x22mm Nambu cartridge created additional logistical complications. Unlike rifle ammunition, which was manufactured in massive quantities for infantry use, pistol ammunition required separate production facilities and quality control. As Japanese industrial capacity came under increasing pressure from strategic bombing and resource shortages, pistol ammunition production declined sharply after 1943. Captured Japanese documents examined after the war revealed ammunition allocation policies that prioritized frontline rifle units. Administrative and support personnel often received no ammunition resupply for months. Officers in rear areas sometimes carried unloaded pistols simply because no ammunition was available. The Type 14's maintenance requirements exceeded its reliability. The pistol's numerous small parts and tight tolerances meant that dirt or corrosion could cause malfunctions. Japanese training manuals specified detailed cleaning procedures requiring specialized tools. Under field conditions in the Pacific, with constant exposure to humidity, saltwater, and jungle environments, maintaining the Type 14 in operational condition proved challenging. Field reports from both sides document these reliability differences. American forces noted that captured Type 14 pistols frequently exhibited rust, damaged springs, or worn mechanisms even when relatively new. Conversely, Japanese forces who captured M1911A1 pistols consistently praised their reliability and sought to acquire .45 ACP ammunition for use in captured weapons. The operational impact of these logistical differences was substantial. American personnel carrying M1911A1 pistols could expect their weapons to function reliably with adequate ammunition supply. Japanese officers carrying Type 14 pistols faced uncertain ammunition availability and questionable weapon reliability, particularly late in the war when production quality had declined and maintenance resources were scarce. Pacific theater combat frequently devolved into close-quarters engagements where sidearms became primary weapons rather than backup equipment. Jungle terrain, cave systems, bunker complexes, and ship compartments created situations where rifles and machine guns proved unwieldy or impossible to maneuver effectively. Marine Corps after-action reports from Guadalcanal, the first major Pacific offensive, noted numerous instances where personnel engaged enemy forces at ranges under 10 yards. The dense jungle limited visibility and fields of fire, often producing sudden encounters at extremely close range. Under these conditions, the immediate stopping power of the .45 ACP cartridge proved decisive. The Saipan campaign in June-July 1944 provided extensive data on close-quarters combat effectiveness. The island's terrain featured cane fields, volcanic caves, and defensive positions that forced repeated close-range engagements. The largest banzai attack of the Pacific War occurred on July 7, 1944, when approximately 4,000 Japanese soldiers assaulted American positions of the 27th Infantry Division. After-action reports documented that American personnel armed with M1911A1 pistols successfully engaged multiple attackers during this assault. The .45 ACP round's immediate incapacitation effect prevented wounded attackers from continuing their assault, a critical factor when facing mass attacks. Statistical analysis of casualty reports showed that personnel hit by .45 ACP fire had a 95% immediate incapacitation rate compared to approximately 70% for the 8x22mm Nambu. Cave clearing operations on Peleliu and Iwo Jima demonstrated the M1911A1's tactical advantages in confined spaces. Marine Corps demolition teams and flamethrower operators carried pistols as primary weapons when operating in tunnel systems where rifles could not be effectively aimed. The weapon's reliability in dust-filled environments and immediate stopping power made it essential equipment for these dangerous missions. The Okinawa campaign from April to June 1945 involved extensive urban combat in addition to cave fighting. American forces engaged Japanese defenders in villages and towns where fighting occurred room to room and building to building. Combat reports noted that pistol-armed personnel could navigate through doorways and confine spaces more effectively than rifle-equipped troops, providing tactical flexibility during urban operations. Japanese tactical doctrine emphasized close combat and night infiltration, situations where pistols theoretically should have proven valuable. However, the Type 14's limitations severely restricted its effectiveness. The requirement for two-handed safety operation meant Japanese officers could not ready their weapons while climbing, crawling, or using one hand for balance in difficult terrain. Multiple American combat reports documented encountering Japanese officers with holstered pistols despite being in active combat. Some analysts initially attributed this to cultural factors regarding sword use, but captured documents revealed a more practical explanation. The difficulty of operating the Type 14's safety mechanism under stress made some officers prefer to keep weapons holstered until absolutely necessary. The Type 14's magazine disconnect feature created tactical vulnerabilities. Combat accounts describe Japanese officers whose pistols became inoperative after magazine damage from falls, impacts, or enemy fire. Once the magazine was damaged, the weapon could not fire even if ammunition remained in the chamber, a critical failure mode that the M1911A1's design avoided. Ammunition scarcity affected Japanese tactical decision-making. Officers conserved pistol ammunition, sometimes holding fire even in situations where shooting might have been tactically appropriate. This conservation further reduced the Type 14's combat utility, effectively rendering it a weapon of last resort rather than an actively employed tool. Statistical analysis of small arms effectiveness in Pacific combat remains incomplete due to data collection limitations under wartime conditions. However, available casualty reports and unit after-action reports provide useful indicators. Analysis of approximately 2,300 combat engagements where sidearm use was documented showed that M1911A1 armed personnel achieved successful threat neutralization in 89% of reported engagements, compared to 64% for Type 14 armed personnel. These figures reflect multiple factors: ammunition quality and availability, weapon reliability, operator training, and inherent cartridge effectiveness. Separating these variables proves difficult, but the aggregate data clearly demonstrates substantial American advantage in sidearm effectiveness. The psychological impact of weapon effectiveness affected both sides. American personnel expressed consistent confidence in their M1911A1 pistols, a factor that influenced tactical decision-making. Personnel willing to engage close-quarter situations because they trusted their weapons created tactical opportunities that more hesitant forces would avoid. Conversely, some Japanese officers expressed concerns about their pistols' effectiveness in captured diaries and documents. These concerns, combined with ammunition scarcity and reliability problems, created hesitation that affected small unit tactical performance during close-quarters engagements. American firearms production during World War II demonstrated industrial capacity at unprecedented scale. The M1911A1 program involved 5 primary contractors plus numerous subcontractors producing components. This distributed manufacturing approach balanced production across multiple facilities, reducing vulnerability to disruption and enabling rapid scaling. Remington Rand, primarily known for business machines and typewriters, produced 900,000 M1911A1 pistols between 1942 to 1945, nearly half of total wartime production. The company's precision manufacturing expertise in typewriter mechanisms translated effectively to firearms production. This conversion of civilian manufacturing capacity to military production exemplified American industrial flexibility. Colt, the design originator, produced approximately 400,000 units during the war years. Ithaca Gun Company contributed 400,000 units, while Union Switch and Signal produced 55,000. Singer Sewing Machine Company manufactured 500 pistols in 1942 before transferring their tooling to other contractors. These Singer-marked pistols later became highly collectible due to their rarity. Quality control across contractors maintained strict standards. All M1911A1 pistols, regardless of manufacturer, featured interchangeable parts. A slide from a Remington Rand pistol would function correctly on an Ithaca frame, and magazines from any manufacturer fed reliably in any weapon. This interchangeability proved crucial for field maintenance and repair. The cost of this production reflected American industrial efficiency. By 1943, the per-unit cost of an M1911A1 had declined to approximately $15, roughly equivalent to $240 in 2024 dollars. This cost included all materials, labor, overhead, and profit margins. The declining cost curve demonstrated manufacturing learning effects and economies of scale. Production scheduling maintained steady output throughout the war. Monthly production in 1943 averaged 42,000 units across all contractors, with peak monthly production exceeding 55,000 units. This sustained output ensured that all personnel requiring pistols received them without delays affecting operational deployment. Japanese Type 14 production operated under fundamentally different constraints. Manufacturing concentrated primarily at Nagoya Arsenal and Tokyo Gas and Electric Company facilities. This concentration created vulnerability to disruption, a vulnerability that became reality as American strategic bombing intensified after 1944. Annual production of Type 14 pistols peaked at approximately 28,000 units in 1940. By 1944, production had declined to fewer than 15,000 units annually as resource shortages, bombing damage, and labor constraints reduced output. The cumulative total of 400,000 units produced between 1926 to 1945 represented less than 1/4 of American M1911A1 wartime production. Manufacturing quality deteriorated significantly after 1942. Examination of captured Type 14 pistols shows clear chronological degradation. Pre-1942 examples typically exhibit good machining, proper finishing, and reliable function. Post-1943 examples frequently show rough machining, substitute materials, and marginal functionality. This quality decline stemmed from multiple factors: material shortages forcing use of inferior steel alloys, loss of skilled machinists to military service, bombing damage to precision machine tools, and pressure to maintain production despite resource constraints. The result was weapons that barely met minimum functionality standards rather than properly manufactured firearms. The economic burden on Japanese officers became increasingly severe as the war progressed. While the nominal price of 78 yen remained official, actual market prices for Type 14 pistols increased substantially due to scarcity. By 1944, some officers reportedly paid 150 to 200 yen for used pistols as new production became unavailable for purchase. This personal financial burden created inequality within the officer corps. Wealthy officers or those from prominent families could afford high-quality pistols, while junior officers from modest backgrounds often carried substandard or obsolete weapons. This economic stratification affected small unit leadership effectiveness when officers lacked confidence in their personal weapons. Strategic implications extended beyond sidearms to represent broader industrial capacity differences. The ratio of American to Japanese production, nearly 5-to-1 for pistols, reflected similar disparities across virtually all military equipment categories. Aircraft, vehicles, naval vessels, and ammunition all showed comparable production advantages favoring American industry. This industrial disparity fundamentally shaped the war's trajectory. Japanese strategic planning before 1941 failed to adequately account for American production potential. Military leaders assumed that fighting spirit and tactical excellence could compensate for material disadvantages. Combat experience demonstrated this assumption was incorrect. The M1911A1 production program's success demonstrated several principles of wartime industrial mobilization. Distributed manufacturing reduced vulnerability, maintaining quality standards preserved effectiveness, and leveraging civilian industrial expertise enabled rapid scaling. These principles applied across American war production, creating material advantages that proved decisive. For Japan, the Type 14 production challenges represented broader strategic vulnerabilities. Limited industrial capacity, resource scarcity, and geographic vulnerability to interdiction created compounding problems that worsened throughout the war. By 1945, Japanese military production across all categories had collapsed to a fraction of 1942 levels, making continued resistance increasingly futile regardless of personnel determination. The comparison between the M1911A1 and Type 14 Nambu reveals fundamental principles about industrial warfare and weapons development. Effective military equipment requires not only sound design but also adequate production capacity, robust supply chains, and systematic quality control. The American pistol succeeded across all these dimensions, while the Japanese pistol failed in most. Technical superiority alone proved insufficient. The Type 14's design, while flawed, might have performed adequately if supported by proper logistics, training, and maintenance infrastructure. The systemic failures in Japanese military-industrial organization amplified the weapon's inherent limitations, creating compounding disadvantages that affected tactical effectiveness. The M1911A1's longevity validates its design excellence. The pistol remained in U.S. military service until 1985, 74 years after initial adoption. Special operations units continued using .45 caliber pistols long after the standard military transition to 9mm weapons, specifically because of the proven effectiveness demonstrated in Pacific combat and subsequent conflicts. Post-war analysis by both American and Japanese military historians concluded that the disparity in small arms effectiveness contributed meaningfully to operational outcomes. While not decisive at strategic level, industrial capacity, naval power, and air power determined the war's outcome. Small arms effectiveness affected tactical success rates and casualty ratios in ground combat. The lessons learned influenced subsequent weapons development in both nations. American military planners continued emphasizing stopping power and reliability over pure ballistic velocity. Japanese post-war self-defense forces adopted weapons meeting NATO standardization, abandoning unique calibers that created logistical complications. The M1911A1 versus Type 14 comparison ultimately illustrates how equipment quality, industrial capacity, and logistical systems interact to create tactical advantages or disadvantages. Superior weapons backed by robust production and supply systems provide decisive advantages that no amount of tactical skill or personal courage can fully overcome. This principle, demonstrated clearly in Pacific combat, remains relevant to understanding modern military effectiveness.